Who watches us talk about the Watchmen?
No one, apparently.
No one, because it's an audio-only podcast.
Whee!
Cue the music. Hello and welcome back to the Comic Lyric Podcast, the podcast where I, Ryan, also currently known as Comic Stan, get this guy who doesn't read comics, but I make him read comics, and then we talk about reading comics because he doesn't choose to read comics by choice, but he reads books, and that's kind of similar, and we see the crossover, what that's like.
I think that one's getting worse.
That's the problem with jazz. You don't know how it's going to be until you say it. And as with me, as always, is my aforementioned watchful co-host. I'm using it twice because it's the same thing. It's Jamie. He's here. Jamie's here.
Hello, mate. How are you?
I am a bit frazzled because I tried to fit in reading the second half of Watchmen in a sitting. And let me tell you, Watchmen...
I also tried that. It's a slog.
Watchmen's great, but it's dense. And we probably got that across last time, but when you try to read it quickly, you either miss bits out or you get so engrossed in it that you feel like time is just like skipping past while you're trying to desperately get the pages in.
Yeah, totally.
I cannot imagine reading this back in the day as issues when they came out.
No.
Because the story, like reading it, the positive side of reading it like this is I can reference things like from previous issues because I read them like minutes ago. If I was reading them in issues as they came out back in the day, I would have constantly had to, I do this these days with good comics. I constantly have to go back and reread issues.
Yeah, totally.
So I barely read anything as it comes out. I normally wait for like issues to build up and then like blast.
You just like to binge it though, don't you?
But this medium, I think the good ones require that. I think it may be why more successful comic books are kind of, as we've discussed before, kind of mid. Because they serve that more like, hey, remember what happened last month? Oh, they fought a bit and then they talked and now this thing's happened. That's all that happened.
Yeah, it's what happened last month is immaterial.
Exactly. Well,
because it's a single short contained story that can be, told within 20 pages, whereas this is longer. It's denser. It's
denser,
chewier.
Absolutely. Longer technically, but even if it was just 23 pages, it'd definitely be denser. There's barely any panels without some kind of talking or narration or anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just bland narration. It is narration that's always like purposeful, like it's from a character or it's from the pirate book for whatever reason, which we'll get into.
I like the pirate book. I think the pirate book stuff holds up.
The pirate book is good thematically, but it's also one of those things I think you could have taken out, and I think you wouldn't lose much. There's still, because there's so much more still in there.
I think it adds.
It adds, but because I'm enjoying the story so much, I'm kind of, when it interrupts with the pirate comic, I'm like, I was getting into the story again. And
I love a sub narrative though,
but there are other sub narratives as well. There's sometimes there are sub narratives with the people of New York and like those kind of lives, and I think that's what I mean. You've already got all that stuff as well as the main
richness
plot.
is already there, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the pirate thing was just a step too far. I think if you didn't have anything else in the subplots, it could be like an interesting comparison to the main plot and the pirate comic plot, but you've got, I think there's way too much in there already anyway. I think it's, because again, while the pirate thing's happening, you've got the newspaper vendor and he's giving like ancillary information about the larger world and stuff. So I get like and
you're seeing what's happened with Dr. Manhattan, and that's, a huge chunk of story. Like him fucking off to the moon. Mars. Mental.
And as well, I think with the kid reading the pirate comic, like Moore said his reasoning for putting it in was, if they didn't have superhero comics, because they've got real life superheroes.
Yeah, we've talked about
pirates would come out. I would be surprised if this was a kind of pirate comic. Put it this way, I don't think this is the kind of pirate comic that would exist in this world. I think it's the kind of pirate comic that would exist in this world if Alan Moore was in this world writing pirate comics. You know what I mean? I feel like they'd be like the superhero comics.
Thinking about it now, I've never read a pirate comic, Ryan.
I don't think I have either.
I think we're missing a trick. I suppose we kind of read One Piece, which is kind of a pirate comic.
A pirate manga, I guess, technically. But again, the reason he did was superheroes kind of took over the medium, didn't they? So that's kind of why we're here, aren't we?
Brian, should we write a pirate comic?
I do enjoy some pirate media. Black Sails, fantastic pirate show. Like, amazing.
All the stuff they're doing in Somalia at the moment, great.
Wrong pirates.
Wrong pirates. We want more Cornish pirates. Arr.
Yes. or not the kind who won't pay full price for WinRAR, wherever the joke is. Wherever that joke is. So, if it hasn't made clear, we are covering issues 7 to 12, the part 2 of the Watchmen limited series.
Eagerly awaited Watchmen part 2. It only took us a week.
It only took us a week. We weren't even originally going to do part 2 so quickly afterwards. But
we just thought, fuck it.
The thinking was, we're in this world. We didn't have anything specifically booked in for this week, so it's like, we're already in this world and in this mindset. Like, to delve into the mind of Alan Moore is like, you want to get everything done while you're in there.
It's hard graft, isn't it? You're in there.
Yeah, you want to get everything done while you're in there so you can kind of get out for a bit and breathe fresh air and you don't have to come back again for a while. So
yeah.
I don't know if we should continue like some kind of metric for every time we say something that Moore's going to hate, especially as we talk about the adaptations later in the episode.
Yeah, right.
That's going to be the time. But back to the main comic and where to start with this. Normally we start with the credits, but we've done the credits. And if anyone's, for whatever reason, maybe days, months, or years later, starting this episode, go back to the part 1 first. Because part 1 it's the credits, naturally, but it's also like how the comic was originally made and, you know, the literally like the transcript that Moore originally submitted for it and everything like that. So listen to that one first, then come back to this one, because we're going straight from midpoint onwards and thereon.
So, talking about the art, though, I do have some more comments about the art.
That's interesting.
Because I had forgotten how much I loved the art at the start of issue 12.
The art start issue 12, is that the white with the vivarium? Is that that's the gruesome. Also, spoilers for all of Watchmen. It's all happening.
So this is essentially the world is now in chaos because of what's happening in the action of the comic.
New York and everyone viewing New York, isn't it?
Yeah, is in chaos. But it's in these just gorgeous, like bright psychedelica.
Yeah.
And I forgot how like just visually lush it is.
Yes.
So what you get is single page panels that is basically like 5 or 6 splash panels in a row of carnage, and each one of them is the kind of thing that you could have on your wall as wall art.
Yep.
It's properly stunning. I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
It's psychedelic colors. It all kind of has like, you know, it kind of rings of pop art, but it's not pop arty because there's so much going on. It's like Andy Warhol did an apocalypse scene. It's fucking phenomenal. It's beautiful. And the colors are so vibrant and vivid, but they're all in that very like yellow to purple sort of psychedelica is the only way I can describe it. And that is how the sort of crescendo of this comic book opens. And it is fabulous.
Yeah. In terms of page layout, like no splash panels throughout the comic up until now, I don't think.
Exactly. And then just blam, 6 of them in a row. I've never seen a comic book go... I mean, again, a comic book that is as dense as Watchmen is. Like, Alan Moore is constantly trying to get across as much as is possible with this one. And as you were saying, you know, not a panel goes by without some important piece of dialogue or something important happening. And then he dedicates 5 panels at the start of his final issue to these gorgeous psychedelic splash panels. It's, as a creative choice, it's mad.
With no narration, no talking or anything, just and everything's happened.
You don't see a character until the 6th one.
Yeah. And nothing's happening. It's all still. Like there's no even. It's still panels, but there's no motion. There's no action happening. It's just stillness, quiet, and dark and bloody and bleak. But
not bleak because it's beautifully psychedelic. That's what's so fascinating about it. He could have made it grim and bleak like that first opening panel with the blood dripping through the gutter. But instead, he gave us psychedelica. And that's so interesting.
I think that's intentional because getting into it later, but the reason for the massacre and the carnage is not of this world.
Oh, and I think that's... Of course it's purposeful. Like nothing here is nothing that happens in this comic book doesn't happen on purpose. Yes. Everything is purposeful. Everything has a meaning. But it's just... Yeah, and I agree with you. It really does convey a sense, an otherworldliness to what's happened. But I'd read this a couple times before, and I just wasn't expecting that.
No, it's
you know, this is the first time I've read it since I've been a semi-professional comic book reviewer, I suppose. It's a weird thing to have to describe yourself as. And yeah, it's just so lush and like well drawn and beautiful and stylistic. And then it kind of just drops you into that snowy landscape of where Ozymandias has been hiding out while all this is going on. And so it really, it kind of pulls you into that final issue. And I just thought that was noteworthy because this comic, as we mentioned last week, really pushed the boundaries of what comic book art could look like in the 1980s when it came out. And to this day, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, no, it's singularly unique.
Singularly unique. There's a redundancy there.
It's a bit of an oxymoron, but
it's not an oxymoron. It's just a redundancy.
It's unique and singular.
No, it is both of those things. I just enjoy. Yeah. I enjoyed the redundancy.
I think we should definitely look out for some other Dave Gibbons work to look at and see what that looks like without the Alan Moore influence. Like, what's how similar is it? How inspiring is it? In terms of the actual layout of the comic, I found the second half did a lot of I thought we weren't going to talk about art at all.
Yeah.
Except for being like these specific panels are cool, like you've done. But I did notice in this second half, there's a panel usage. So it still does the 3x3s, which is like the Watchmen staple now.
Yeah.
Which as we discussed last week, is Dave Gibbons pushed for that, and now
super impactful, great choice. It looks fantastic.
What I noticed here is they started using a lot of, not in place of, but just as well as, they did pages where it was 2x3, and then 1/3 of the bottom.
Yeah.
And what I found that was not just a creative it looks cool. What it was you had all this other stuff going on, and it was cutting to different scenes with all this other extra information about the world, the global political stage and everything like that. And then you had the bottom third was Night Owl and Silk Spectre getting ready to break Rorschach out of prison.
Yeah.
So it was like, this stuff's happening, but we're getting ready. This stuff's happening. They're still getting ready. It's like, this stuff's happening. It's like, they're almost ready to go. And what it felt like, none of the stuff happening was particularly suspenseful, but the way it was laid out made you go, oh my God, we're ramping up to something.
Yeah.
And because these other scenes are from everywhere, it's like bloody White House. I can't remember really where, but like the newspaper stand, White House, Silk Spectre's mum talking to Hollis or something. All these things from like everywhere else, and Night Owl, Silk Spectre getting ready to go just ramps up this tension.
Watching Night Owl and Silk Spectre kind of get back into hero work is probably one of my favourite arcs from this half of the comic book. That I think it's in issue 7 where she's doing a walkthrough of his bat cave,
his owl cave,
the
whatever it's called,
the owl's nest, we'll name it, and they're looking at all his shit, and it's all kind of cool. And then she comes through and he's there in the Night Owl costume and he's like, ready to go? She's like, I'm ready to. No, she says ready to go, and then she sees him in the Night Owl costume and he's ready, and it's like, oh my God, they didn't have a conversation about being ready to be heroes again, but they had a conversation that led them both to that point, and that's super fucking cool.
Oh yeah. And I want to get into that issue entirely as well, like first off, but before we leave off,
do you know what it reminds me of? It reminds me of when as a couple, right, you'll be getting ready to like go out, and you're both kind of pretending that you want to go out, and it's like, I don't know, your fucking girlfriend's work do or something. And
not
then
bald for personal experience.
Yeah. And you'll kind of be getting ready to go out, and then she'll come through in her pajamas, and you go, oh, thank fuck. We're not going anywhere tonight. And it just made me think of that, where like two people are getting on the same page without having to have a conversation about it. And it seems a bit convoluted, but then you realise that happens in real relationships and it happens in real life. And it was just such a great moment.
I mean, Moore, if nothing else, just pulls that human element into this fantastical stuff.
Doesn't he?
Like, rare job for especially a comic book writer or former comic book writer, which might actually have some news on that towards the end.
Really?
Maybe. In terms of panels, I took a picture of one, which I thought was it's not a splash panel, but it just made me kind of stop and take a picture of it because I was like, I just loved this whole panel. It's not a particularly amazing moment. It's just Night Owl and Silk Spectre getting to the prison, but the angle there's from, the proportions of the people, it's a kind of low shot looking up past the panicked guards to the, what's he called, Archie, the owl mobile thing. But it's just a beautiful shot.
It's really cool.
Even the facial expression of the guards is the shock and terror, and then you just see the kind of calmness of Night Owl and Silk Spectre and Archie as well, like the juxtaposition of them both and all the spotlights and everything. This is a panel I think I would legitimately get like printed and framed.
Yeah, totally.
And especially because it's not one of the more famous ones. So I can be like, oh, this is a little lesser known Watchmen piece.
Because, obviously in this half, we had the classic quote from Watchmen. I think probably the most iconic quote from Watchmen. I'm not trapped in here with you.
Yes.
You're all trapped in here with me. We
get a pretty famous quote later on as well, which we'll get into when we get there.
Yeah. And so that was the moment that really stuck out for me, was that the two, there was sort of three things that really stuck out for me. It was the prison break. It's so interesting. That also really stuck out for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I remember the first couple of times I read it, I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. But this time I was like, wow, that's really fucking cool. When Night Owl and Silk Spectre first do that little bout of hero work in, I think, issue 7, and then that whole passage with Rorschach and the psychiatrist in the prison. And I remember that being impactful the first time, but it's obviously where we get that quote from, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then him going absolutely native on those guys in the prison. It's just that this whole second half is fabulous, Ryan.
Yeah, it really gets across like how dangerous Rorschach is. Like, you already kind of got a sense of it, but there's pros and cons over the whole comic, now that we've finished it especially, where sometimes I'm like, oh, they really got across like how dangerous they were. And then there's other points where I think I could have done with a bit more from Night Owl and Silk Spectre in the prison.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to rush too much into it, but just a very quick, in the film, there's a big fight scene in that part. And it shows you how capable these characters are. That's maybe missing here a little bit, and maybe I'm only seeing that by comparison.
But I think just to sort of counter that argument,
sure,
seeing them almost effortlessly break into a prison, I think that gives us the same sense of competence that we get from the fight scene in the movie. I think in the movie, you needed the fight scene to show them being competent. In the comic book, the fact that they just pulled it off without a hitch.
I think it got across the competence of Night Owl's tech and how he uses it. What I specifically could have done with a bit more is Silk Spectre being capable, because you don't see her fight a lot. I think the only time you really see her fight is when they get mugged in the first half.
Yes.
And that's like decent. Like, she's capable, she can fight, but I could have done a bit more like her taking on like a couple of inmates and like showing like she's not even just like,
there's a reason for her being here.
Exactly. She was literally trained as a child by a former vigilante to become a vigilante. Like, she might not live the life as such, but she's got the skills if she needs them. I could have done with a little more of that, but again, like, I'm always trying to fit in a lot of stuff in a short amount of time, so maybe that's probably the reason. Speaking of tech, I also noticed they literally pay reference to Night Owl's exoskeleton.
Yes.
And I was literally like, I know that doesn't get used later. That's such a waste of like Chekhov's exoskeleton. Where it's like, could have brought that back. Like, and you know what as well? This coming on, we constantly reference the other comics that were considered the mainstream graphic novels, which were Mouse, and more directly for this, The Dark Knight Returns. And in that, Bruce Wayne Batman literally wears an exosuit to fight Superman.
Yeah.
So it's another strange coincidence, a much smaller one in this case. The previous one being that there's government oversight over superheroes and making them quit. But I thought this one was like, oh, I thought he was going to put on the exosuit to like, force a guy out of prison or something. Would have been cool.
And I suppose they explain it away quite nicely, because he says, I broke my arm the only time I ever tried to use it. And so it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. But again, it's just, and this is a real hot take here, guys.
Oh, wow.
This is a real hot take here.
Just go on.
It's just bloody good. It's just really bloody good. Newsflash, The Watchmen is excellent.
Yeah, and we took this long to get to it. I'll tell you what I was looking out for more now was the foreshadowing, because having read this before and watched the film and blah, 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 I was looking for the foreshadowing. And again, this goes back to the getting more out of it on repeated viewings.
Yes.
And noticing just like the constant mentions of the artists and writers that have gone missing, and how it's telling you like this is important, but it presents it in such a way that's like subtle background stuff. And you have to have that knowledge of like, there's no wasted space. All words are there because they need to be.
Yeah.
And the television is telling you these people are missing because it's going to come up later.
Yeah.
But noticing especially television on in the background. I think it's while Night Owl and Silk are first getting together.
Yeah.
But it's happening in the background. Immediately after that, the news then talks about Adrian Veidt.
Yeah.
Or
Vitae.
Vitae?
Yeah, I think it's Adrian Vitae.
I'm gonna say Vite because I don't think there's like a bit after like the DT. You'd think there'd be like an E at the end.
So we'll go Vite.
Vite. But just mentioning him immediately afterwards, like there's so many little bits of foreshadowing.
We don't see a whole bunch of him until the end game, do we?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a misstep because the fact that he comes back towards the end maybe kind of it shows a bit too much, shows the hand a little bit too much.
Yeah, and the fact that, his gaff is pretty hard to break into is undermined by the fact that right at the start we just see Rorschach turn up in it.
But in Adrian's, but he was there working, so I think he was like, "Hey, Rorschach, come on in," like,
hey, buddy,
and
good to see you, my guy.
I mean, there's so many little bits to get into without kind of spanning across the whole thing.
Yeah,
but just like little bits like Rorschach as they're going to find Vite and is like. He writes in his journal, I can't think of a more dangerous opponent.
Yeah.
And when he's like, that's coming from Rorschach, you're like, oh shit. Like, But again, they kind of ramp up his capability. They talk about being a smart businessman and rich at the start. And then it's like towards the end, it's like, oh, by the way, he's insanely intelligent and he's extremely capable. Like,
and he's
fighting.
He's an Olympian, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. So
like he's an Olympic gymnast or something?
I don't know about gymnast, but I mean, maybe. But as far I think he references later about like traveling like Asia and learning like martial arts and that kind of stuff. So he is like insanely superhuman level, almost super. He's like Captain America before he was. This is
literally what I was about to say. Like he's what Cap was originally meant to be, which is just the absolute pinnacle of what a human can be.
Yeah, exactly. Love a little bit of humor in the post-coital part of Night Owl and Spectre, where he's like, "I think we should break Rorschach out of prison." She's like, "What?" It's like he could pull out a funny every now and then, like when the situation calls for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
In terms of little like references and stuff, again, like seeing them popping out all over the place. Again, these were, I make my little notes about like this bit was funny, this bit was cool. It was literally just these foreshadowing bits.
Yeah.
One of the most notable ones. I mean, for one thing, they constantly show the perfume ad for Nostalgia by Vite, and you're like, well, that means something.
Yeah.
There's a bit later, which I think I only picked up knowing the ending, which was the back of the Pirates comic book has a like fitness ad.
Yeah.
Did you read it?
No, I didn't read it, but I know the one you mean.
It says, I wrote it down because I think you have to get the exact word to like get it correct. The Vite method. I will give you bodies beyond your wildest imagination.
Yeah.
And then that comes up later in one of the main panels. So it's hinted at and then it's like explicitly like, this is what we were referencing the entire time. And again, just all the little details like coming back to Rorschach with the sugar cubes. He takes them when he's next to Night Owl's place. And having picked on her before, I was like, he's getting the sugar cubes again. Like,
he's back at the sugar.
He's such a weirdo. It's crazy. So that psychologist you were talking about talking to Rorschach.
Oh my God. I have so much to say.
Yeah. I'll tell one thing I noticed before you go ahead in your bit.
Yeah.
After the escape and everything, and you see him just kind of being a bystander in New York, the way they show him, he's like in the background of shots, like behind the newspaper stand. He kind of, I don't know if this is me reading too much into it. He kind of takes the place of Rorschach without his mask being in the background. Is that like a larger thematical thing of like the madness kind of transferring from Rorschach to the psychologist in a way?
I think
because he's like he becomes distant and talks about like horrific things at dinner parties and after that.
Yeah, no, I think they definitely did that knowingly.
Yeah,
I think that definitely mirrored because early in the comic book we see Rorschach as Walter quite a few times, don't we? Walter Kovacs.
Yeah.
And I suppose the joke there, well, not the joke, but the point of that is that we don't recognize him as Rorschach yet. And then, seeing the psychiatrist kind of go through that same journey and also become really isolated. I mean, it's like it really hammers home how much of a corrupting force Rorschach is. And I think that whole passage and that whole subplot is dealt with beautifully. You know, the way that they give us these pretty stark character revelations about how unhinged Rorschach is. You know, the fact that he's doing those Rorschach tests.
Yeah.
And he knows what the psychiatrist wants to hear. It's a beautiful butterfly. It's a lovely bunny. It's not what he's actually seeing, which is his prostitute mum slapping him in the face because he ruined her time with the John. And so, you know, it really gets across not only that, he is suffering and that like this man is deeply mentally ill, but also that he's self-aware enough to be able to hide it, and that's fucking terrifying.
I do think we lose some of the worst aspects of Rorschach as we get on, and I think that's just a narrative structure thing where like you're introducing the character and you introduce like his political feelings and his worldviews and stuff. Now we're just kind of getting on with the action.
Yeah, and
I think that does go on. You know, that addresses a go on his lack of compromising, which obviously comes in the end. I think we should save talking about the end as a whole thing because it's a big subject in itself.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of all encompassing, but definitely seeing him kind of grapple with like the results of his life and stuff and how he's just completely unwavering even still. Yeah. Like you would think someone who'd been a vigilante, causing crime, violence, and then being put in prison with all the people that he'd put away. And what's funny is the prisoners don't understand. Like he put you in prison. Like you met him before he went insane.
Yeah.
Like he was a vigilante then. He's a serial killer now.
Yeah, totally.
So they're just like, we're going to get you Rorschach. Because like someone needs to be like, you don't know what he's turned into since you've been in here.
You know what you've seen
you knew
what
him when he was all right. You knew him when he was Batman.
You've
now
seen
he's Punisher.
You've seen what he was capable of. He is now insane. Yeah, it's powerful stuff, isn't it? And I think that fully was my favorite part.
Yeah. He did not know he was going to get rescued or broken out or whatever. So he was literally just the short mob boss guy and his two goons. Great scene, just like funny. Like that is quintessential like Punisher stuff. Like the bad guys get like thoroughly despicable bad guys getting fucked up by a vigilante who's worse than them and more capable. Like that's like essence of the Punisher kind of stuff.
That's what it's built on, isn't it?
Exactly. But he's just facing it like, I'm just going with emotions. Like they're like, riot's gonna happen, and we're like 100 prisoners are gonna try and kill you, and he's just like, bring it on.
Yeah,
like,
let's go.
He doesn't even care about his own well-being because there's nothing else other than every act he makes is in service of his worldview and his philosophy. Like, he is unwavering from it, even in the face of his own potential, like, horrific death, which pays off in the end.
And I think it's scarier that it's not in service of a grander goal. He doesn't have a goal, he just has a philosophy.
Yes, exactly.
And that's sort of scary in itself. Like, that's not a great way to live. I don't think that's a particularly connected way to live. And yeah, I fully agree with you. Like that, the prison stuff is just really galling, and what he does to those two guys in that cell, super graphic, super fucked up.
Great scene with when Night Owl and Silk arrive, and he's like, just go to the toilet quickly.
Yeah.
Fun scene. Like, again, that's Alan Moore having fun with characters. Like, it might not, like, it's dark and violent, but that's him, like, having a laugh. Like, because he could write stuff a lot more bleakly. And he's just putting that little bit of dark humor into this as well.
Yeah, totally.
And the blood, like, spilling out at the end kind of thing. Like, the issue before that, touched on earlier, the conversation between Night Owl and Silk Spectre in issue 7, like, I thought that was a great whole issue of, like, plot advancement.
Yeah.
Like, literally, characters start at the beginning of the issue in point A, and they get, by the end, they're in a completely different point B.
Yeah.
And showing you the slow rhythms of how they get there with, like, the help of each other. Like, they're not actively helping each other, but just how they interact moves them and propels them into where they need to be for the story.
Yeah.
Sounds like boring stuff, but, like, I kind of marveled, like, the mechanics of the story in that part. Like, they go from two kind of broken people who are trying to find solace and comfort in each other and it not quite working, and going from that to getting the costumes back on, helping people, like saving the day again. And Silk Spectre, I think they kind of have their arcs, and Silk Spectre, I think, is hers kind of breaking free of, like, being told what to do her entire life.
Yeah, totally.
And, like, reclaiming her what do you call it?
Autonomy.
Autonomy, exactly. And whereas for Night Owl, he's kind of breaking free of his own fear and anxiety.
Yes.
Like, he loved being a superhero and a vigilante, but only when it was convenient to.
Yeah.
And as soon as the rules were like, you can't do that, and he was like, okay, I won't, like, even though he wanted to. This is him reclaiming that in a sense of, like, you know what, fuck the world, like, who cares, let's get all the costumes back on, you know?
She's finding herself, he's reclaiming himself.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's interesting, isn't it, because you can't find yourself in another person, but if you do find the right person, my god, will they help.
Exactly. The dream sequence, I think, is a great use. Like, I'm not normally one for thematic or meaning-based dream sequences to
nothing is less interesting than somebody else's dreams.
Well, that in essentially, but in fiction as well, there's a lot.
Still, nothing is less interesting to me than a character's dreams.
But I think it's a bit of a hack crutch when they use that to get across like the deeper meaning of a character.
Yeah, totally.
I think this one I give exception to because it's very short. And it's very obvious. So I don't feel like it's a kind of wanky, like, ooh, what could it mean? They saw a deer in the forest and then the deer had their own face and then they killed the deer. You know, like that kind of it's like, all right, you're trying to make it deep. This is a very obvious, like, him and Silk Spectre on a planet because he knows he assumes that's where Manhattan's gone.
Yeah.
He's putting himself in Manhattan's place with Manhattan's girlfriend or ex-girlfriend. They are naked and then strip the skin to reveal their true selves, which is the costumes, and then the explosion goes off. So I think that's such a quick, it's very obvious. It's like, here's how he is right now.
Yeah.
Here's a quick dream to get across. No bullshit. There's no like, I wonder what the significance of like, and it's like more of all people, very subtle in the real actual story. Susie does a little dream sequence. He's like, this is what it means. Like, when they're not messing around.
But
it's a good change of pace.
Yes, it is, and it's not that egregious. It's not as egregious as it could have been.
Great art.
Yeah,
like you could take any of those panels and like that'd be a cool, or even like that kind of whole page. Like as I think probably was a 3x3.
Yeah,
but that would be a great kind of put up panel as well, kind of thing.
Yes,
I think those kind of issues is where we kind of ramp up into like the main kind of plot. Like this feels like when, to be fair, that issue 7 feels like we are now in this is the plot that would have only been 6 issues territory.
Yeah, totally.
Without all the extra like, again, ancillary information from the larger world and stuff. But it feels like we get back into the investigation as soon as they break Rorschach out. I feel like the moment where they Rorschach, so we have Manhattan turning up, and did you notice the reference to the writing technique at Deus Ex Machina?
Yes.
I thought, is that more kind of hanging a lantern on like a not great story technique? If you know what I mean? Like, Manhattan does show up, and the reason he shows up is we're going to have a conversation. So I thought I'd pick you up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this might be me getting into, I think I'm going to have to get into my potential plot hole of Manhattan's whole perception of time thing.
Let's go.
So it addresses it more here.
Yeah, it does.
In the previous episode, I said we'd only discuss it as like the 6 issues.
Yeah.
Like, and it looked like a contradiction. He could see all of time, but he couldn't do anything to prevent it for reasons.
Yeah.
Here we get that fleshed out a bit more, and I understand it better, but I still...
You don't like it?
The general concept of he's existing in all time.
Yeah.
So he sees everything. Also, quick note before we get on the adaptations, I thought the Snyder film fixed the problem.
Yeah.
Turns out they actually had it here, but they address it way later, and the film just moves it further up, which makes more sense.
Yeah.
So I'm not giving Snyder or whoever adapted the script the full credit of like, they fixed the problem. They move things around to make it a bit better.
Yeah.
That's all they did. Alan Moore does introduce this idea of tachyons or radiation blocking his sight, and he can't see what's happening at a particular point.
Yeah.
I think still that, I don't know, the idea that he's like, oh, like, we're about to have a conversation, so I picked you up for her. It's like, have you considered if you didn't pick her up? Because there's no other way she could have got there. He is following the path. His whole thing is like, oh, if you can see everything, why can't you change it? Can't you be God? Like, Silk asks him that, and he says, oh, I can see the strings, but I'm still a puppet like you. Yeah. It's like, but you're choosing to follow the path, like, of destiny or whatever you want to call it. But his excuse is, oh no, I'm experiencing all moments at the same time, so I can't change them. I don't know. It's hard to reconcile, because I feel like if I say it's dumb, I'm like, am I the dumb one for not getting it? You know,
it's one of those things that I think it's hard to wrap your head around a being experiencing time in that way.
Yeah.
And so it relies on suspension of disbelief. It relies on you saying, right, he experiences time differently. This is the way that he's choosing to like act on that. I know what you mean. And within the context of such a grounded story, a character like Dr. Manhattan, who is so powerful, doesn't make a lot of sense. So, I mean, he is arguably, for me, more powerful than, say, Superman.
Absolutely.
Because, Superman is very powerful, but he still experiences time in a linear fashion.
Also, we'll be getting into that a bit later in Adaptations as well, but go on. It's a little foreshadowing, like Moore does, Maybe a bit more bluntly.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
Foreshadowing, but I'm not Moore, so I've never claimed to be.
Yeah, well, I am a fucking wizard.
You look more like Moore than I do.
Oh, do you think? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. I turned up today in a robe, Brian.
You went, it's fucking magic.
It's fucking... Oh, no,
we can't do that.
I'm from Birmingham, it's fucking magic. That's not bad, actually.
It's still too hard.
I'm from Birmingham, it's fucking magic.
It's fucking magic.
It's fucking magic from Birmingham.
Down here, it's a little down here.
It's from the Black Country, it's fucking magic.
I don't want anything to do with Watchmen. Leave me alone. And you gotta get the phrase to get the
because you just went northern, not Midlands.
We are not good at accents. So for anyone who might have had that misconception,
right? Just for that comment, I'm going to do the rest of the podcast in an accent. Although I am just speaking of people who are bad at accents. Sure. Because the Oasis thing has blown up. My feed has really wanted to show me that Kevin and Perry sketch.
Oh yeah,
the one where Perry turns up in a big fur coat and the little round sunglasses because he's just been to Manchester.
I hadn't seen it originally, but I saw the stills of it going around in response to the Oasis news.
So basically, Perry turns up with a bad Manc accent, and Kevin tries to copy him throughout the conversation, but does a really bad job. So he's like, Perry, I've just been in my room. It's been a really boring week, and he just can't quite nail it. And then you get to the end of the sketch, and Kev's mum comes in, and she goes, how is Manchester, Perry? And Perry instantly takes the sunglasses off and he's like, oh, it's really lovely, Miss Person, as he does. And it just really amused me while we were both doing our bad accents. And I was like, this is essentially that Kevin and Perry sketch.
Basically, we're the Kevin Perry of comic book podcasts. I think that's fair to say.
What, we're just popping boners and pooping in the sea?
I didn't know that was... I mean, you're going by the film, but...
Yeah, sure,
why not? So I'm trying to desperately find something for later, which I'm trying to load up on my phone. But in the meantime, with regards to the whole his Manhattan's thing, it is addressed more directly later. There are points where he says he can't see certain time, but there's one specific incident. And again, I don't know if this is more just having fun with it because he hangs a lantern on it later. He literally, Manhattan says to Silk, in a moment, you're going to tell me that you're sleeping with Night Owl.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, why do I need to bring it up again if you already know? Who cares? And then a moment later, she mentions it, and he goes, you're sleeping with Night Owl? And it's like, that moment, I think the intention is to be, he's experiencing all moments at the similar time, and this is the moment where he finds out, so he reacts in the same way. To me, it's like, are you an idiot? It comes off like a comically dumb character.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that.
Like Homer Simpson or Peter Griffin. It's that kind of joke almost.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be. I recognize the intention, but I think how it comes across is maybe we are looking at it with the eye of people who have experienced that kind of intentional humor. There wasn't that in the 80s, so maybe it didn't, fully aware of that. But then even later...
But I don't know that this is played off for humour, is it?
No, I don't think. I think, again, the intention is meant to be showing how he experiences time.
Yeah.
But then later, he more kind of hangs a lantern on it when Silk literally says she's telling Night Owl about that moment. She goes, he said I was going to tell him about us sleeping together, and then I mentioned it, and then he was surprised. She's confused. So it is meant to be played serious.
Yeah.
But again, that to me just comes across like you're experiencing time, but you can't change it. I don't know. Maybe I'm probably looking into this way more than should be, and
yeah. But I see where you're coming from though, and it was jarring for me too. It wasn't just you. You're not. It's safe to say you're not the only person who had a reaction to this.
Yeah, I think calling it a plot hole might be too strong because, one thing I saw which kind of made a bit more sense was someone generally talking about plot holes. They said, if it's in service of the story and it improves the story, then is it a bit too strong to call it a plot hole? Or is it just one of those, it's fiction, so you maybe suspend your disbelief a bit more in this regard if it's good. And this is good. The whole time thing makes for Manhattan's origin story where he's the phrase of I'm in 65, I'm in 77, he's viewing it all that way. It explains explains the point when he's in Vietnam and a comedian kills the Vietnamese woman because he just was experiencing it, and as it plays out. But I think I'm coming in it with the too much of like an analytical comic book, or just fantastical fiction in general. It's like, I like the rules, because when you have the rules, then that's how you kind of play within the fiction. And this to me feels like he could have changed, he could have stopped all this, he could have done something, and he didn't. Like, I don't know, is it just kind of like more trying to have his cake and eat it too, where he's
which is ultimately why he ends up on Mars, because he just wants to remove himself from humanity.
But even he knows he's going to go back.
Yeah,
so
he
what's
does,
the point of leaving, like, if you're just going to go back anyway? So I don't know. In that issue, the other aspect, which I enjoyed a lot more, is Silk Spectre looking back through her memories and getting to this realization. I think that was done extremely well. Yeah. Like the small hints in every scene. Yeah. None of them too obvious. Like, I'm only catching them because I know what's about to happen. Yeah. But all those scenes, you think, it's a bit kind of like, I'm trying to put my head in the place of like someone who doesn't know. Yes. It seems like quite random events. Yeah. And then you see the connection after a couple where it's like, the comedian's coming up a lot in this. Yeah. And then I think it does a good thing where it does it so subtly, and then it presents you with all of the clues at once. Yeah. And it's like, here's what you missed in all the previous flashbacks, and this is the thing we're getting to in the end. So what did you think of that whole like structure? I mean, it was a structure. This is the thing, like, it was driving towards a pretty, distinct point, and there was a structure to it. I mean, it's an enjoyable passage, isn't it? I didn't really read into it as much as you did, if I'm being entirely honest. I think I was looking at it because it's such a big plot point. Yeah. Like, the revelation that comedian is the father of Silk Spectre. Yeah. And I think that it does a really good job of showing you these seemingly random flashbacks, because you don't really expect, like, with all that's going on, like World War, like murders of superheroes, like, the looming World War III, like everything's happening. It's kind of like, who gives a shit who's father? Like, I mean, she does. Well, exactly, but that just seems inconsequential through the large story. But it then drives it. It creates it in a very personal way through someone's own flashbacks. And while they're having one of the most difficult conversations of their lives, where they're trying to literally appeal to a god to say, hey, save us, maybe. Yeah. And the god's like, A god who's also her ex-boyfriend. Like, exactly. Weird, isn't it? But a god who's like, I don't know, like, what's the point? Like, grand scheme of things. And what do you think about the plot point of the whole thing about, was it thermodynamic miracles? So it's like, he's trying to justify, like, life isn't that special. And then I think it's the realization that of the chaos of her mother's life and the comedian as a human being in general coming together to create this person that he has loved, maybe we assume that's like the miracle of life, and why it's sacred, like the chaos that creates entire consciousness or something like that. And it's so interesting because he always has a sense of how important humanity is, and you realize that this is the point where he realizes that, and it just happens so late in the story, but he's brought that forward. I think that's what's interesting about that to me, is that you have to look at it within the sense of the fractured timeline. Like, you're seeing the point at which he realized that, but he's always known it, and it's always impacted on his worldview, even though he only found it out at the end of the story, right? Yeah. I thought it was weird that, because he's talking about, again, these thermodynamic miracles. And he's talking about, like, it'd be like as rare as, was it like air turning to gold or something like that? Like, that's what he's looking for. I did kind of wonder that moment. Does he realize he's talking about himself? Because he literally makes like water from nothing, like and glass on Mars and that kind of stuff. I mean, he is a miracle, isn't he? But does he view himself, like, the way he's talking? He's not talking as if, I'm special and nothing else is, so I want to find something else that is special like me. He's just talking about, like, I just want to see something interesting. And not even just to see it, to justify its existence. Yeah. That becomes a thing with the human race. He's like, why should the human race survive if they're just going to blow themselves up? Like, who cares? Yeah. And then he's like, turns out humans are really cool, and I should actually probably help them live, maybe. But he's talking about, again, miracles in nature. It's like, dude, you went from a human to a god, like, by accident. Yeah, that's crazy. And it's like, if war had happened before that, you would not exist as this miracle maker you are now. So is that, again, is is he aware that he's talking about himself? Does he realize he's maybe being contradictory, being like, oh, nothing special happens on Earth, so who cares? It's like, motherfucker, you were made on Earth. Like, you were the
my brother in Christ.
My brother in Christ, you are the miracle. Yeah, that was kind of my
no, and I hear it, and it's, again, I suppose it's somebody who has godlike powers but is still confined to the neural network of a human mind.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned that last one was the idea that he's getting removed from his humanity, which he is, but the people around him think it's more further on than it is. Like,
yes,
because he seems so different, but he does have a lot of humanity in him still.
Yeah,
and that's what he's grappling with. And I think he is getting to his arc, is he's realizing that, and he's getting to a point where he's like, yeah, I'm not completely unhuman, but I'm also not human. So he's kind of deciding what to do there.
But what I suppose we're also seeing is we're seeing the point at which he has these revelations, but again, because of the way the fractured timeline exists, they're always a part of his character throughout. And so his character seems so inhuman, but is that because he has already had that enlightening moment of his own humanity? And so we're seeing him kind of almost go through the motions.
Well, this is the point as well. He's like, oh, you're gonna... Because the way he talks about it as well, I think the problem is, I think it's such a lofty, ambitious thing to write a character like this.
Exactly,
I think even more has faltered a bit in this really, really grand, like, ambition to make a character like this. You've got him being like, oh, I'm going to take you to Mars and you're going to try and convince me to save humanity. It's like, you know what she's going to say. Like, you've already decided life is worth living. He's talking as if it's not.
It's almost as if there are two characters there. There is the Watcher, and I use that specifically in reference to like the Watchers from
Marvel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he is almost this omniscient being, but he's omniscient, but only in as much as he can view anything he's ever seen at any time because he's seeing it all at the same time. And so there's that character who's this sort of devoid, grandiose, godlike monster. And then there is him that is in the moment, the Dr. Manhattan that's in the moment with all these characters having these heartfelt conversations. And it's like he's two, isn't it? It's like he's two distinct characters at different moments in the story. And that's jarring, but if you view it that way, I think it makes more sense.
Yeah, I guess. But it is the problem of you are trying to make sense of it rather than just enjoying the story, which, again, I think it's the result of this very ambitious character that Moore was trying to write. And it pays off a lot, but it has naturally these holes in it as well.
And I agree with you that actually having to have an approach to a character is interesting, isn't it? But... you know, that's something that people will do when they're talking about literature, is, you know, they'll say, oh, but this character, when looked at through this lens, or when viewed in this context, or if understood in this way, gives us this kind of, school of thought or whatever. And so it's not entirely unusual that you'd need to do that with a text like this.
It's more that with this, it's Moore's written a character who inherently we cannot understand their perspective.
Yeah.
And then you have this problem of we naturally try and understand, just like people in everyday life, we try and understand characters' motivations and what drives them and, understand where they're coming from. So when you've got this godlike character, credit to Moore, he's done the work of creating a character we cannot understand because he's a godlike character.
Yeah.
Like, that works in that way. So maybe that's the intention. Maybe the questions we ask is not of a reader, but of like, the people around him.
I don't think it matters if that's the intention. It's certainly the effect, isn't it? It's certainly the effect that it's had on us.
I mean, I think it's the intention only because then, like I said, he has Silk Spectre later talking about this contradiction of him being like, you're sleeping with night owls. Like, you knew that already. Like, but her addressing that later is like, she is like, she's us, the reader, of like, we don't understand how he experiences life and time. So... and maybe we're not meant to. Maybe that is the point. Whether intention or not, certainly the result, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So to break it down, maybe it's a plot hole, but who cares?
I mean, the thing is, it's bloody interesting.
Yes.
It's really interesting, isn't it? And again, I come back to something I said earlier. We have these very grounded, not superhero-y characters. We have these very grounded, not superhero vigilante characters as opposed to superheroes.
Yeah.
And then a god.
Yes.
Just in the mix with them. And so
it's crazy to think that happened because of the Charlton Comics characters.
I know.
There's like 5 normal ones and one Captain Atom who's like a god. Like, and more was like, I'll make a story out of that, and just like got this, you know.
Yeah.
In terms of like you're saying, like the groundedness, like the note I made as going through is this is where it ramps up from grounded to fantastical, but it does it at such a slow and subtle pace that at no point you go, hang on, wait a minute, like.
And you are right. In the second half, the narrative does become much less grounded.
Yeah, but it's like it's that whole frog in a boiling pot, which we debunked already.
Yeah,
we didn't put frogs in a boiling pot, but it's
somebody did,
and it's an untrue thing. But because it slowly ramps up, at no point do you go, whoa, this is all too crazy now. It's like it's slowly built. But I mean, you start with bloody Dr. Manhattan. Like as soon as you reconcile that, like anything can happen, and maybe that's the point of the story. In terms of one of the more grounded moments, the conversation between the detective and Night Owl is quite good in the sense it's a lovely little bit of writing of like the detective obviously knows that he is Night Owl, and is very obviously warning him of becoming Night Owl again. Yeah, and I thought like it's such a cool little moment. Like that's just like generally a fun moment where a character knows, but they not showing they know, but they basically know, and it all kind of culminates with a little bit of point where he goes, sugar cubes, they come in these, don't they? It's like, by the way, we found this wrapper on Rorschach, and you go like, oh, he knows, like, that's, and again, the sugar cubes,
the fucking sugar cubes,
every little detail comes back.
Is Chekhov's sugar cube?
It wasn't Chekhov's exoskeleton, but it is Chekhov's sugar cube.
Yeah,
and that's such
Chekhov's
an Alan Moore thing. Don't look at the exoskeleton. Look at the sugar cubes.
We're gonna have a Chekhov's gun moment. It's gonna be sugar cubes. You're like, okay, Alan, do what you need to do, bro.
And what's more, a gun is used later. And never mentioned.
Yeah.
So I think Alan Moore's playing us with this whole Chekhov's thing.
I think he is. Yeah.
Even though he likes to hang a lantern on stuff and all that kind of stuff. Where do we go from here? Because this is where it starts to ramp up into the
we
kind
should
of
just hit
story.
the end game, man.
Hit the end game? Cool.
Yeah.
I tell you what, the one little note that a cool moment I recognize, and this feeds into the ending.
Yeah.
I was looking out for like hints and Easter eggs and foreshadowing and all this. Right?
Yeah.
I noticed that the locksmith who was fixing Night Owl's door every time, his company is called Gordian Knot.
Okay.
Which is just like, it could be a fun reference in itself. Like we know that the general expression of a Gordian knot, like something difficult to undo. Yeah. He's a locksmith. He literally, that's his job, is undoing these knots. Yeah. But locks. Later, when we're getting the Veit's speech, like later on, and he's waxing lyrical about Alexander the Great, literally mentions the Gordian knot. Yeah. And I looked up, it is specifically an Alexander the Great reference. Yeah. So and it doesn't get addressed any further. And I scanned it on Wikipedia, just kind of glancing through, that apparently it was Dave Gibbons who was just like, oh, we were just coming up with like cool references, like when we were kind of filling in the gaps, and like putting that logo on a thing was just like cool reference. Even though then may not have intended it that way, I read that as, oh, Veit's keeping track of Night Owl by spying on him with this guy who works for a company he owns, and probably has the keys to his house, and probably he's bugged the Moloch's place later as well, or we find out later. So what was initially just like, oh, that's a cool Easter egg. I was like, oh, that could be a plot point.
Yeah, totally.
And again,
it could have been, couldn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, it's not, but it could have been.
Exactly. And I could interpret it as it is. And
totally.
It fits. And maybe that's the credit of this kind of comic where it has they've filled every little space and nook and cranny with
something.
References. Yeah. So everything can be interpreted that way. So leading up to the big ending, I thought very interesting, Night Owl and Rorschach teaming up again.
Yeah, it's great.
There's a lot of little moments there which I thought were fascinating. One of the more obvious ones, I think, is like Rorschach kind of opening up a little bit, like lowering the guard a bit with Night Owl. I think
one of the only characters that he trusts.
Oh, exactly. And it is
maybe the only character that he trusts.
And it's after he, it helps him escape from prison. So actually he's like, this guy, I can count on this guy because I was going to be fucked up, but I didn't care about it. But I'm glad to be out of it anyway. Yeah. I'm assuming Rorschach talks exactly like that in his head.
Yeah, that's probably what it sounds like.
Well, I was going to... And then Auri's like, I'm going to kill you. But yeah,
do you reckon that's what his voice sounds like? I reckon he's squeakier.
I'm going by the Snyder film, which is
maybe
more probably wouldn't like. Although lettering, which we didn't mention earlier, like Rorschach's lettering is a different way.
Distinct,
so you would presume he talks a different way as well, like probably a rougher voice or something. But I'm Rorschach. Not quite Christian Bale. The drugs. But the softer moments, I think people more gravitate to, of again him being like, at one point he's like difficult, and what's it? Night Owl turns to him and is like, "Look, just fucking shut up for a minute, all right?" And then he's like, "Hey, sorry, I reacted like that." And Rorschach's like, "No, I'm being difficult." Like just a homicidal maniac, like Rorschach being like, "You know what? You're a friend. Like I am being difficult. Actually, I will, appreciate you helping me out and stuff and whatever." That softer moment, I think, is what is more obvious. A moment of like Night Owl's influence on Rorschach.
Yeah.
What I gravitated towards more was Rorschach's influence on Night Owl.
Yeah.
Because they're in the bar. Rorschach's investigation thing of like, let's just kick some stones and go to the bars and ask around, which then pays off, which I was like, that... I don't like that works, because that seems like a really rudimentary way of like, let's just see what people know. Like, but they're in the bar, they find a guy who knows something, and then Night Owl discovers, he overhears someone talking about his predecessor, his pseudo father figure, previous vigilante, was it Mason Hollis, I think is?
Yeah.
That he was murdered by a bunch of gang members, essentially. And he gets very violent very quickly, and like once it strangles the guy, and he's like trying to, could have killed him in a rage. And it's Rorschach is like, hey, not in front of civilians. Like, I thought that was fascinating.
I've been doing this for a long time. You need to keep it quiet, bro.
Rorschach's like, even I wouldn't. Like, I'll break some fingers, but there's a lot of people. Like, we shouldn't kill everyone in front of a lot of witnesses. But I thought that was a cool moment of like Night Owl being dragged into Rorschach's world, and maybe how their relationship is now. Because before they were on the same page, they're doing the same thing, and then Night Owl quit and Rorschach went mental. But I think now it's kind of almost like it's a positive for Rorschach, because he's being influenced by a nice guy, but Night Owl is being influenced by a fucking homicidal maniac.
And maybe Night Owl needed that a little bit.
But then he has more of a positive, like, stand up for yourself from Silk Spectre.
Yeah.
But with Rorschach, it then goes over the top to like, I'll kill you, like that kind of thing. And the fact that he snaps with Rorschach, like he wouldn't have done it before, that may be a positive. But I think generally this whole thing, like Night Owl especially, goes show, and to an extent, Manhattan in his story, showing how you are affected by the people around you.
Yeah.
And I think that's like a undercurrent plot. Like we talk about the big themes of like politics and society and superheroes and all that. I think just these little like moments of who you are around influences like who you are in the moment and who you become and that kind of stuff. So I thought that's like, if that was an intended theme, I mean, it must have been.
Yeah.
But just like that's those scenes in particular, like you get so much from those moments.
I mean, it's a truism, isn't it? And it is true. Like the people that you are around and choose to spend time with influences who you become. And it's played out really beautifully here. And it's played out in a really meaningful way. And there's a lot of influence these characters are having over each other in a way that you wouldn't normally see in a comic book sort of superhero ensemble. Like I just feel like, with speaking out of turn here, because I've not read much of it, I don't feel like you'd probably see that in a Justice League comic.
I mean, definitely not a mainstream one. Like they wouldn't entrust a writer to do something so deep, because a writer like that, like Moore, would also do a bunch of wild stuff as well. Maybe this is one more way.
Well, like turning Superman's dad into a Klansman.
I mean, no one else would do that. They gave him the kind of hour like, all right, you get it in a fantasy world, you can do it there, but it's not real. And Moore's like, I'll take that.
His dad's a Nazi.
Space Klansman, yeah. I think it's you'd be hard set to find it in a mainstream comic, but like we always say, good writers get lesser known characters, do great stuff with it. Like I can show you, we will cover some comics I think that does, maybe not to this level, but like similar things. Like I always mentioned Matt Fraction's Hawkeye.
Yeah.
Like that's one that like really delves into the character and character relationships and stuff
Alan
like
Moore's
that.
Swamp Thing.
That's on the list. We've got to do that at some point for sure. So maybe 100th episode or something.
We do, yeah. We just do more May.
You were ready for more. more
this May, coming to the nearest podcast dispenser.
And we licensed the theme tune for every episode, just more. How do you like
it?
More, how do you like
more? It's Dad's a Klansman, more.
It's World War III. Oh no, there's a squid. Like,
great.
I tell you what,
solid stuff, Ryan. This is gold.
This is the journalism that we got in this for.
Absolutely.
So
journalism. I love it when we get the odd comment where people critique us as journalists. You're like,
why didn't you get it correct? Why didn't you do the research?
Do you think we think we're fucking journalists? Like, this isn't how this works.
I've never been accused of being a professional.
No.
I don't think either of us have, to be fair.
I have a friend who is a professional hack.
Really?
Yeah. He's a professional journalist.
Wow. Should get him on the show. Like, what do you think of Alan Moore?
I don't think I'd have an opinion.
Well.
He's a cool guy.
Read Watchmen, and then we'll talk about
He's a very cool guy, but yeah, he works for a big newspaper that I won't mention.
Fair enough. Well, back to the comic.
Yeah.
One last larger, grander thing, which I think is an interesting point that I was noticing as we were ramping up to the end. Because I think once we get to the end, I think the larger meanings and stuff are like done. Like, we just get like the resolution of like the chaos and everything. But leading up to it, what I noticed, I don't know if this is a theme, if I'm just shouting in the air or not or whatever. I think I noticed a theme where characters were having these set characteristics that defined them, and in this story, all of them were going against them in some way or another.
Yeah.
Right. So as we spitball this kind of thing, I think initially, obviously, Night Owl is quite meek. Quite, like,
anxious.
I'll go with, whatever. And he's standing up for himself and, reclaim himself. Silk Spectre is finding herself finally after being guided for most of her life. So she's going against it that way. Rorschach goes from crazy mental killer to a bit more understanding. But he's like, in the softest of ways, he's like, trusting.
There's some growth there.
Yeah.
There is some growth there. There's an arc there for Rorschach, isn't there?
But then ultimately with him, his demise, as we see later, might be due to his unwillingness to compromise.
Yeah.
And whereas the other characters are not necessarily compromising, but they're, going against the grain of like what defines them, he doesn't, and that is his downfall potentially. Yeah. Even though we are shown signs that he might, in some ways he's softening in some ways, but then other ways like, no, I'm still firmly believing this.
Yeah.
The comedian, I think a really interesting one. We know him as violent sociopath from 77 beforehand.
Yeah.
But then as we see with these flashbacks, maybe he has changed a bit himself as well. I mean,
potentially.
That leads to his drunken confession to Mollusk, or whatever his name is.
Yeah.
Because as much as horrific shit he's done, he sees this line of like where he can't cross.
Yeah.
But also like the fact that Silk Spectre's mum, like what I thought was really interesting is how, because we know what, he attempted sexual assault on her previously. But she goes
trigger
back,
warning.
Yes. But she goes back to him later, and that results in Silk Spectre being conceived.
Yeah.
That I thought was such an interesting line is Silk Spectre's mum literally says like, he was shocked that I was angry at him. And that made me realize that he didn't see it that way and saw him for like what he really was. And maybe in that moment he wasn't the monster from Vietnam in 77. Like maybe he had grown into a bit more of like not realizing the things he had done and the effects they were having on people and all that stuff. Veet, I think, is a really interesting one.
Yeah.
Because as we're getting into the ending, and everyone knows the ending, if you don't know the ending of Watchmen by now, you shouldn't be listening to this episode. But keep it playing anyway.
Yeah, just mute it, keep it on in the background.
But there's two ways I think I could look at him, right? One, the thing that spurred this whole thought was Night Owl hacks into his computer. I say hacks. He guesses the password on the second attempt. For the world's smartest man. And also, the way they trace it kind of back to him is they realized the company that had been hiring people to do with all these instances, the mask killer kind of events, is that it's named Pyramid Company or something. And they're like, who's into a bunch of Egypt shit? Like,
oh, do you reckon it's Ozymandias?
Yeah, exactly. So he's quite stupid in those ways, if you think about it. But then I thought, is he stupid, or is he just like, by the time they figure this out, like, it's fine? Like,
yeah, he hasn't accounted. I suppose either way, he hasn't accounted for them.
Or he has, and he's like, they cannot stop the plan. Like, it does it.
So he hadn't accounted for their ability to stop the plan.
By the time they're probably broken into my office and hacked my computer, it's, they need to get all the way to bloody Arctic by then, and it's golden. The other way I think to look at it with him is his driving thing is saving the world. He
thinks he's going to save the world.
Yeah, his retroactive look at like seeing from his perspective that Crime Busters meeting, and him having like, oh, the comedian showed me the way.
Yeah,
he probably didn't realize it. Also, loved a little tidbit about when he first met the comedian. He was like pretending to be a criminal, and he let the comedian win, but he was analyzing like his fight patterns and stuff. I was like, that's like real detail shit. That's with all the big fucking Manhattan stuff that I'm like questioning. I love those little details that like explain everything and add the richness. Yeah. But with him, the other thing could be he's trying to save the world, and that leads him to going against it by genocide. And is that his like contradiction? Like he was following this route of one thing, and it's led all the way back to evil for the sake of the grander good kind of thing. You know? And Manhattan, the other character, his whole thing is his drifting away from humanity and realizing the sanctity of life and that kind of stuff. So, what do you think of this? Is this a coherent theme?
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to you and not argued with you. So
if you disagreed, you would have been like, let me stop you right there.
I absolutely would have done, yeah, of course.
Beyonce had the best video of whatever that whole thing is.
You've done this with me about 100 times nearly now. You know, if I had a qualm with something you were saying, I would have interjected.
I thought you might have been doing that thing, was like waiting for me to finish and going, I'm about to ruin this whole man's career, like, and just debunk like everything.
No, I was happy to let you go.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't help that I'm wilting.
This is why we're at the desk.
It's warm.
Should we get more drinks?
Yeah.
We can take a drink break. All right, we're back from our drink break. We've got our nice cool drinks.
Yeah.
Little tip, if ever hot, put them between your legs and keep the lower half of your body even cooler. Much better when you've got like a screw top bottle like mine.
Yeah, I'm drinking from a pint glass. I don't really want to put your pint glass between my sweaty balls.
And you don't want to shift, and because we get excited talking about Alan Moore.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it looks like I pissed myself. So,
Watchmen Endgame. We've done Watchmen Infinity Wars. Now we're doing Watchmen Endgame.
that kind of is how it works.
It kind of is how it works, brother.
Maybe he influenced the whole super medium afterwards.
I
mean,
we've
established he did. Like, he definitely did. So, the Endgame, the big thing. We talking about scenes earlier, like quotes. You said about the prison one. I think I haven't even written it down. I just, because you don't need the whole quote. It's just the single line of, I did it 35 minutes ago, is chilling. I think it was groundbreaking for the time, because back then, and even like we only kind of subvert it more nowadays, like in the past kind of couple decades. Back then, the heroes beat the villains. And if they didn't, it's because they were going to come back in the next issue and beat them. Like the biggest things around this time were probably like the big crossover, like DC Marvel events.
Yeah.
Where, oh no, the universe has to be rewritten and we retcon everyone back into a single timeline because we got it too complex beforehand.
Yeah.
Or Thanos has snapped half the universe. Oh wait, we got the gauntlet back and now we've snapped everyone back into existence, so it's all fine. This, I think, was, again, groundbreaking for the time of like, you can't stop me because it's happened.
Yeah.
Like, there's no... Maybe the heroes like can pull it out in the second half or something.
There's no second half here.
No, there's no time travel, despite how Manhattan experiences time. Yeah. Like it's happened. It's done. Like the bad things happened, and all we're seeing afterwards is the heroes just reconciling with what's happened.
Yeah.
The great foreshadowing earlier of the artist doing the sketch of the monster.
Yeah,
and we have no idea. Like, I think there was a great red herring here. With how, because he does the thing where he sits in front of the TV and he knows what stocks to buy just from watching like 100 different TV like the channels changing every 100 seconds kind of thing. He's like, war impending, like we should invest. And they're like, but sir, you didn't want to invest in munitions. He's like, no, there'll be a baby boom after that's what happens when people think war's going to happen. So we should invest in porn in the short term and then baby food and formula and stuff. But I think that's a red herring of like, oh, he expects everything to be fine afterwards.
Yeah.
And then you had his vivarium in the Arctic.
Yeah.
And I thought, is that a red herring? Again, hard to judge because we know what's about to happen.
Yeah.
I thought, could that be viewed as because he hasn't said what the plan is yet. Could that be viewed as when the nukes hit, he's going to have like these pockets of society that's going to continue afterwards or something like, and then he just spills his whole plan in a very stereotypical way where he explains everything. And then the reference he makes was like, do you mistake me for was it Republic serial villain?
Yeah.
Like in a radio show kind of thing. It's like, if I thought, would I explain my plan to you if I thought there was even the slightest chance you could affect the outcome?
Absolutely.
I did it 35 minutes ago. And I like, what a scene.
It's cold, isn't it?
It's cold. It's shocking, I think, for like readers at the time. Like even looking back now, like knowing it's coming, I'm like, this is the inevitable point. Like, I feel like rereading it actually puts you in the position of Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, it kind of does, doesn't it?
I'm experiencing it all, but I cannot, and I know it's all what's happening, but I can't affect the changes. Like maybe the reader is Manhattan.
Manhattan is the reader. Yeah, maybe. That's great.
But yeah, fantastic line. I love how absolutely helpless Night Owl and Rorschach are to him. And again, the foreshadowing of Rorschach being like, I couldn't think of a more dangerous opponent.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, he's really smart, but, you know, and then when they get there, he's like, oh, you guys are doing nothing to him. Like, you cannot, like, you might as well be trying to fist fight Manhattan. Like,
like you can't touch him, can you?
No, he's so fast. Like, Rorschach specifically goes, he's talking about V, and he goes, in his journal, he goes, he's faster than Dan. Probably faster than me. It's like, all right, Rorschach, calm down. just off your ego. Yeah. Like, come on. Like, he makes mincemeat of both of you. Like, don't even worry about it.
Yeah, don't even consider it.
Niall pulls out that laser that he just suddenly has all of a sudden.
Deus Ex laser.
Well, we literally get the Deus Ex character earlier, so that's nothing by comparison. The scene we started off talking about the big panels of the horrific massacre. The scene where Manhattan and Silk are just standing in it.
Yeah.
And Man's just like, interesting. And Silk's like, can we fucking go? Like, there's fucking bodies around here. Like, Jesus. I did like I said I liked it from the film, but it turns out it was from here. The idea that Veet was creating tachyons to intentionally hide this point in time from Manhattan.
Which is so clever because, you know, you thinking about it, you're like, right, you're mortal. How are you going to do this thing without alerting your old friend who is a god?
An omniscient god.
Yeah, and it's like, well, he's worked it out. Like, he is. But as Dr. Manhattan, right, if you experience all points in time together, and then suddenly you know you don't die in any of those points in time, but you can't see anything ahead of them, you think he'd have investigated that at some point,
well,
you?
Again, this is the whole...
But I suppose
issue.
This is the point in time at which he has to investigate it. Like, he can't investigate it beforehand because it hasn't happened yet.
This is the only one he doesn't know what's going to happen in this moment.
Yeah.
But he's and again, great foreshadowing later. He's like, it's a bit messed up, but I don't know what's quite happening. I'm in the snow and I'm killing someone, but I don't know who it is. Like, great little foreshadowing of like, you just assume, he probably kills V. Like, because that's what you would assume is going to happen. Great moment as well. Again, coming back to Manhattan's perception, he's talking to Laurie, to Silk Spectre, but he's also talking to Night Owl indoors 90 seconds later, and he has to explain to both of them at different points. He's like, talking to Laurie, he's like, saying so. He's like, no, I'm talking to Dan 90 seconds from now. And then 90 seconds later, he's like, no, I'm talking to Laurie like 90 seconds ago.
Yeah.
But then that's explained. It's like, because I'm close to these tachyons, that's messing with my perception kind of thing. When he gets deconstructed by the machine again, another thing I asked before, would we have known the redhead was Rorschach? Do you think we would have bought that as Manhattan dying or being killed in that moment?
Maybe, yeah.
Because it's then like is quite cleverly written where he's like, he comes back, he's like, of course I was going to kill. That's the first thing I did was make myself a new body again.
Yeah.
I've got more abs this time, if anything.
He's just got an 8-pack.
And a bigger dick somehow. Like, I've always had these. Like, don't worry about it. But that is a clever kind of point, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then for Veidt to then kind of show the result of what's happened, and for there immediately to be this like, oh, the worlds are coming together because there's a bigger threat kind of thing. And Veidt's like, that, and he's just like, yes, bullseye, did it kind of thing. I think that's quite like an interesting, like, again, a hollow, like, we saved the day. Like, did you though?
Yeah.
Like, leading up to that point, what I was saying earlier about like the pirate comic, like whether that was necessary or not, you do get this ramping up of these bystanders who we've kind of known and, you know, got to know over the issues, all in New York. Like there's a fight kicking off, and again, feels like something's about to happen, but you don't know what. And that's when you're like, that's when it kind of really hits you, the devastation, because they are bystanders who've got to know who you know have died.
Yes.
And I think that's very clever. And because again, I was like, why do we have to keep going to this like newsstand with the pirate guys? Like, this is why.
It shows us the human fallout.
Exactly.
It humanizes this very otherworldly story. And again, we've had this time and time again with comics that we've read where it's like, we don't care about the characters, right? And so it's really hard to make a reader care about to make a reader care about an outcome for a character that you don't care about. And so by showing us these characters at different points in the story and making us bond with them a little bit, or at least just exposing us to them, it makes that ultimate end so much more impactful, doesn't it?
Exactly. And when you just know that these people who you were seeing minor resolutions, like Rorschach's psychologist, is like rekindling, or was it reconnecting with his wife?
Yes.
And then that happens. Like
it's tragic, isn't it?
The kid who's been reading the comic, who we don't even realize we've got to know.
Yes.
Because we're just experiencing the comic through him. But every little thing like that. Great foreshadowing as well with the band that's playing in Madison Square Garden. Do you see what the band was?
No.
Pale Horse. Exactly. And that's mentioned throughout the comics. Like there's constant things like Pale Horse, Madison Square Garden, like this date kind of thing, like coming up this week. And on the day of them performing, a lot of death, like death on a pale horse or whatever. Yeah, the whole scene, the whole revelation, I think like that comic is probably one of the greatest single issues. And it's over 2 issues, so it's the greatest 2 issues, I guess, ever. Resolving that afterwards, or like them dealing with it, you obviously have like, I think it does go a little quickly with Silk and Night Owl being like, this is horrible, and V's like, well, we've got peace now, so if you rat on me, then that's all gone, so that was all for nothing, kind of thing. They're like, I guess we have to reconcile with this, and Niall literally one point is like, I'm on board. It's like, I don't think you'd say that after like agreeing to cover up a genocide.
Yeah, totally.
Like not maybe the language I'd use in that kind of moment.
Let's fucking go.
Well, fucking Silk and Niall go off to fuck like immediately after witnessing a genocide, essentially.
I mean, I think that's a pretty human response.
I guess so. Like, I mean, we can't really say because we haven't been in this kind of scenario, but there is something to that, isn't there? It's a weird reference as well where she's like, oh, you smell nice. Like, what's that smell? It's nostalgia by Veidt. But is that a clue of like maybe she's finding comfort in the familiar with him, like in all this tragedy and craziness that's happened?
It's human connection, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what the comic's all about, as we've determined. Human connection and personal arcs and growth, that kind of stuff.
So, in the interest of me surviving this recording, I think we need to hop on to the end game of this episode. I mean,
the end game, well, to me, the end game is Rorschach. Right?
Oh, right. Yeah,
his unwillingness to compromise. Like, that's the scene that's one of the most famous from Watchmen, isn't it? He knows what's going to happen. He knows he could easily get out of it if he just compromised his, not even morals maybe strong, but his beliefs.
His values.
Yeah. And he openly says he could have gotten away with it easily. Maybe that's the thing. It makes it even more interesting. He could have just said, yeah, I'm on board, and then just fucking tell everyone as soon as he gets back, right?
Yeah.
And even they kind of planned for it a little bit where Veidt's like, no one's going to, like, I knew he was going to be aboard, but he's fucking crazy. Like, no one's going to believe him. Like, he could tell everyone all of this shit. No one's going to believe him. But it's interesting that he could have just been like, yeah, I'll keep my mouth shut and then tell everyone later. But he's like, no, I'm going to tell everyone. It's like, you know what's going to happen.
You know he's going to kill you.
Do you think maybe that could have been Rorschach in similar way to the comedian, who also has this kind of reaction of like, I can't live in a world that's like this.
Yeah.
Because if he really wanted to get the word out and like tell everyone,
the best way of doing that would be to pay lip service.
Yeah. But I think...
And he's capable of that. He's capable of pretty intense deceits. Like, he sat over multiple sessions and lied to a psychiatrist.
Exactly.
Lied to a person whose whole training is about getting to the truth of people's like proclivities.
Yeah. So maybe that's the reason why we're showing that earlier.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize any of this. I'm literally like stream of
We're
consciousness.
having this
like,
thought. Yeah. It's quite fun watching you do it, actually.
But I guess he couldn't live with being in that world, and kind of in a way that some people do was it like suicide by cop kind of thing? Like suicide by Manhattan? He's like, he isn't going to let me get away with this, so I'm going to make him kill me. Kind of thing. He takes his mask off for it, which I think is him kind of, again, if his sole goal was what he said to get the information out he could have, that's the Rorschach way, isn't it? Like achieve by any means, right? Lying to your friends, easy, if that's what he wanted. But that's not what he wanted. And I think maybe he was shedding the Rorschach persona, because he refers to it as his face. Like when it's taken off in the when he's arrested, he's like, give me back my face. Like he refers to it as his face instead of his actual face.
Which means that Rorschach didn't get killed, Walter did.
Exactly. But then Walter, did he strip that persona, knowing, well, it wasn't Rorschach who was choosing to die, it was Walter couldn't live as Rorschach in this world anymore.
Yeah.
And you see as well, in terms of his softening of character, you see him empathize with one of the kids of the landlady.
Yeah.
Literally seeing himself in the kid. Does that influence where he's just maybe sees the cycle? Like this, maybe he believes this is the only way things can really change.
Yeah.
Because nothing changed with him. No. He didn't really affect any real change. He just had to live a certain way.
Yeah.
So I think that's. I thought I was going into it a bit. I was like, "There's a lot more to that than
you think there is." Yeah, on the surface level.
And maybe that is Rorschach's redemption in a way. Like,
maybe actually,
he was a really bad guy who thought he was good, and this is him realizing he cannot function in this world.
But it's also, one of the things that he almost always saw as the most admirable in the comedian is that the comedian didn't compromise on his values, whatever they were. He didn't change, and Rorschach remained steady in what he believed until the end.
Yeah, I think comedian. I wouldn't say that applies to comedian. I think that's more telling on Rorschach. Like projecting.
I agree with you. I don't think that of the character either. But it's the thing that Rorschach chose to admire in him.
Exactly, and ignoring all the horrific.
Exactly. Stuff he was able to ignore every other sort of aspect of the comedian's character and chose to admire his steadfastness. And we see that same steadfastness in Rorschach at the end, and there's something sort of interesting there, isn't there?
But was it steadfastness or was it giving up? Like, because again, if he was steadfast, he could have achieved
maybe
the end goal, but he chose not to. And that's the thing, isn't it?
I mean, he was fucking dumb.
maybe, yeah. Maybe it's deeper than we can imagine. Yeah. And just the little tidbit, I like Veet kind of reconciling, like, he was so steadfast in his belief, and then right at the end, he asked Manhattan, I did the right thing, right? And Manhattan's just like, he's like, in the end, I did the right thing. And Manhattan's like, it never ends, and just disappears. Yeah. Just leaving with the ultimate, like, did you though? Like, are you sure about that? And Veet's just like, uncertain, like one of the most steadfast certain characters.
Yes.
He's left with like was I right in what I did? I've asked God, and he's just fucked off without giving me a proper answer. Yeah. So was I right kind of thing. So maybe all comes back into beliefs, morals, like how you interact how the characters interact with the world and each other and that kind of stuff. Grander ideas than we can really properly address, I'd say.
Yeah.
But we've done a pretty good job for a couple of comic book nerds.
I think so, yeah. So the adaptations.
Yes. So the first one, obviously, we've both seen the Zack Snyder film, right?
Yeah.
And obviously, one I've made this note previously, but I think it's interesting for someone who hates adaptations, and he's had a range, hasn't he? Like, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was awful by all accounts. I like it, but I saw it as a kid, but I recognize it's horrible.
I liked the film as a kid, yeah.
Yeah. From Hell, I haven't read it to the comic, and I don't think I've properly seen the film.
There's a From Hell film?
Yeah, there's a Johnny Depp film, I believe, about it.
Really?
I might be wrong. I might be confusing that with a different film.
1 minute.
We'll check that.
Are you thinking of the Demon Barber of Fleet Street?
No, I think I'm confusing it with some about a book or something like that. There's a lot of Johnny Depp films that could be From Hell. I'm pretty sure there is a film adaptation with Johnny Depp.
Well, fuck.
There is?
Yeah, From Hell, 2001, Johnny Depp.
Wasn't imagining it. But considering we didn't even barely know about it, it's maybe fair to say it wasn't a great adaptation, considering the source text is so revered. Give
me a minute. Oh, yeah. Okay. So From Hell has a Rotten Tomatoes score of 57% on the tomato meter and 66% on the popcorn meter.
Not great. Definitely
not good at all. No. I mean, did better with the public than it did the critics.
Most films do, I think, don't they?
Yeah, but didn't do well in either regard.
So my point is, V for Vendetta, I think, was pretty good. Most people enjoyed that. Varying degrees. With Watchmen, he has had the most faithful adaptations.
The V for Vendetta film isn't very good.
I enjoy it. I think it's pretty good.
It's okay.
It does make a very distinct change of going from anarchy to revolution. Definitely a thematical change, which I guess works for it, but I don't know. We don't know until we compare it to a different adaptation.
Moore presents a very connected philosophy in V for Vendetta.
Yes.
And I don't think the film does a great job of conveying that.
That's fair. I mean, again, it's not it's not talked about to the level of Watchmen, so on either case. But with regards to the Zack Snyder film, I do think, like you said before, I think it was a succinct way of saying, we were talking about the plot hole, and they were like, well, they had a great script and millions of dollars, and they just had to solve these one or two plot holes. But I do think they did a good job of condensing it and adapting it into a more kind of streamlined way while still remaining mostly faithful. The biggest thing with the Snyder adaptation is they changed the ending.
Yes.
How do you feel about that change?
It's been a long time since I watched it.
So if you're missing it at all, all it is instead of the squid, what Veidt does is he uses Manhattan's powers because they've been working together on stuff. Yeah. And he's actually been secretly studying Manhattan. He uses Manhattan's powers to set off bombs like Manhattan's powers and blames Manhattan. He's like, he has attacked. Well, also interesting, it's not just New York, it's across the globe. So it's meant to equally unite all countries against Manhattan because he's attacked. He's, in quotes, attacked all countries.
Yeah, I mean, it makes more sense.
It's more kind of concise and stuff because the squid stuff does get into a lot of kind of outlandish stuff. Like in the end of the comic, it suddenly revealed there's psychics.
Yeah.
Like just out of nowhere. And I think that was a bit of like more being like, ooh, actually this part's a bit loose. They're psychics.
Yeah.
Like you just quickly there's psychics.
Just tightens it all up.
Yeah. But it's not really needed. I don't know, but
I think it's a more concise ending. I agree with you. And it's
more personal choice for Manhattan to leave it because he's taking the blame. Like he's for someone who is removing from humanity and rediscovering his humanity.
Yeah.
He then has to choose to be hated by humanity.
And there's all these little thematic nods. There's all these little nods to that being the ending in the actual comic book. So like when Manhattan transports all of those people out of that TV studio, and there starts being questions about should something this powerful be allowed to exist.
Yeah.
For the eventual ending of that story to be him being framed for killing a bunch of people, I think is it's telling and is interesting. I'm not mad at it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think there's such a taboo of like crediting any adaptation of Moore's work because of how he feels.
Yeah,
but I do think that is a good way. I wouldn't change the comic, put it that way. Like I love the slow build of the monster, the writers and artists, and creating this thing, and how it's like. But there's weird stuff like it's had a psychic impact on anyone who didn't kill.
Yeah,
but it does still kind of tie true where it was transported using Manhattan's transportation powers.
Yeah.
And there is again, details guy. I love this little bit of like, we couldn't transport a living thing and have it stay alive, but we don't need it to do that. We can have it die on impact as long as it kills a fucking load of people when it gets there, Yeah. And another little change as well is, like as you just mentioned, he doesn't teleport people out of the studio. He teleports, I think, straight to Mars, I think, or just away from them, kind of thing. I might be misremembering that.
No, I think I'm with you. Yeah,
I tried to watch some YouTube clips of the Watchmen film to like get up to speed, but couldn't, kind of thing. But
I mean, watching the whole film would have made more sense.
Well, if I had the time.
Yeah, this is it. When does one have the time?
Exactly. I did notice in the YouTube like videos, like the CGI on Manhattan is, by today's standards, really good.
Yeah,
he looks amazing.
Yeah, for the time as well, because it's the noughties, isn't it?
Yeah, late mid noughties. Like I don't know. This is why we're not journalists.
I knew it was in some point in the 2000s.
Yeah, exactly. But he looked amazing. Like that was real care and detail for that.
So obviously the new adaptation is out, right?
The part one of the what they're calling a live comic book or so. It's an animated movie. But yeah, it's out and it is, I'd say 95% of the shots and dialogue from the comic. Like,
that's really cool, man.
Well, here's the thing. Like, it's an interesting thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, one of the responses that I saw when I was kind of just seeing like how people thought of it, a common response I saw was, what's the point? Like, if it's so, like, maybe the point of an adaptation like,
is to adapt it.
Yeah, I don't think Moore hates adaptations. Like, we know this to be the case. He doesn't hate adaptations because people are messing with his work or changing it. He hates it because he's been kicked out of the room. Like, he has no say of it. It's done without any of his acknowledgement or consent or anything. So that's what he hates about it. I don't think he really... I think he wouldn't allow any adaptations at all, regardless of how faithful they are or not. So... I think it is kind of pointless. It's a marvel, like what they've achieved. Like they put all this time and energy into it, but then the question does become: you could just read the comic,
yeah, maybe,
and get quite a similar thing. So, like to the point where the animated movie, the panels intermittently going in concurrence. What was the word you used? Concurrently. They do that with the scenes.
Yeah.
It cuts from the investigation
cool.
to the murder to the investigation to the murder. So they're doing it so faithfully. But yeah, it's kind of what is the point after a while. The other ones I think are interesting to know is there's comic sequels to it.
Yeah.
There's one called Doomsday Clock, which I think we'll do.
We should, because I've never read the sequels.
Yeah, no, it's kind of wild. Like they kind of roll in the Watchmen characters to the DC universe.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've heard about this.
They do it in a separate universe, so it's not the main DC universe.
But Rorschach's not there.
No, he's gone. No.
He's long dead.
But there's a character who might or might not be Rorschach related, or some. I'll tell you now. If you want spoilers for Doomsday, stop listening now. There's a character who looks like Rorschach. Like he's wearing all the Rorschach stuff, and everyone's like, "We know you're not."
Somebody's
Rorschach.
picked the mantle.
He has. Yeah. Do you want me to tell you who it is?
Yeah, go for it.
It turns out to be the son of the psychologist.
Oh shit, that's fucking cool.
He finds the files on Rorschach like before the incident.
Yeah.
And he kind of gets absorbed into it. And then he, I think, is somewhat affected by he's in New York, but he's not outside, so he's not killed by the squid attack. But I think he's that psychic thing. It messes him up, and he kind of he's been absorbing all this Rorschach material, and that kind of fucks with his mind, where his end result after the attack is thinks he's Rorschach, but not in a way that he's like, I'm Walter Kovacs, but in a way that he's kind of like the Rorschach mantle. It's chosen him. Like he hasn't just chosen to become it. Like it's that kind of weird thing.
That's pretty cool.
It is an interesting comic because they try and adopt the tone and the pacing of Watchmen, and that is weird seeing DC characters in that way. Yeah. You see like Veidt and Lex Luthor kind of interacting. And they're quite similar
that's
characters.
Does Dr. Manhattan meet Superman?
That's what they build up to. So Manhattan's doing his whole I see all time kind of bollocks. And he's like, he knows that it's going to result in a fight between him and Superman.
Okay.
And that's a difficult one to kind of reconcile. Like, that's what you're going to get. Because like, Manhattan can demolecularize people. Like, Superman's strong, but I don't think he's strong on like a molecular level. Like, I don't think he's like, well, maybe he is, but it's literally, it leads to the shot of him about to punch Manhattan, and it's building up to this moment. And I won't spoil it because we will read it at some point, but that's like the main story as it's kind of getting into
That's fucking cool.
One thing I will say is it's written by Jeff Johns, big DC writer, written a lot of stuff. I don't know if you remember what he's written and you're having that reaction or not.
No.
He wrote Flashpoint.
Oh no, fuck you. That's not fair. That's not cool. You took something I love and then let that guy write on it.
How do you think Moore felt?
Oh, mate. Because imagine being Alan Moore, right? And they're like, somebody has got your characters and they're writing a sequel to your thing. And he's like, oh, I'll just go and have a look at some of their other work. And he opens Flashpoint and it's just a hot mess.
He probably already knew Jeff Johns' work. He was probably like, he's probably just begrudgingly like, who's doing the sequel then? Like Jeff Johns, he's like, for fuck's sake. But on the other hand, one thing I think we should do at some point is there's a Rorschach series written by Tom King.
Which, sounds like it could
takes place in the Watchmen universe solely, and it's post the event, so it's kind of a sequel. And it's
with the new Rorschach?
Not with the new Rorschach. It's very weird and interesting. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, cool.
And the other thing I want to mention is something I really enjoyed. HBO did a television series, Watchmen.
Yeah, I quite liked it.
Did you watch it?
Yeah, I did, yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I liked it. I thought it was better than the film.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it's a different thing, but it continues the themes. It does them in a bit more of a more positive or a bit more optimistic way. It slowly kind of introduces the characters that we know and love. It creates mystery that what the fuck's going on here? There's a guy in a manor who may or may not be on Earth or something. Yeah. And I liked it. The themes with the police and the masks, the opening with the Tulsa massacre, which was people didn't know. People watched the show and went, wait, did that actually happen? Yeah. Quick Google. Oh, it did. There was a wealthy black town and a bunch of Klansmen fucking destroyed it, basically. Yeah. I had to do like a recap to remember what happened. And the recap that I watched, they described the one black kid who survives and gets out, literally like the last son of Krypton. Yeah. Comparing this real world, wealthy black town in like the late 1800s, I think, like that far back. Like the Superman.
Post-slavery, pre-Jim Crow.
Exactly, yeah. I really love the character. I can't remember his name. It was something like Silver something, but he wore the mask. Yeah. His backstory, I think, is so great because, spoilers for this TV show that was out a few years ago, he's like this really paranoid character. He wears that, it's tinfoil essentially, but it's like the silver mask. He's kind of a Rorschach-esque character. Him revealed to be, and they're mentioned in the comic. It pays so much detailed attention to the comic. Yeah. Like it preserves it exactly as it is. He's a missionary like a Mormon missionary, and they are in the comic. Yeah, like I don't know if it's the same character, but they're
there.
And
they're present.
Like, like, hey, we'll buy this book. Like, hey, do you want to buy our book? Like, we're trying to convert people before the end of the world. And his story with the girl, and he is naked in the middle of the squid attack, like, and how he's wearing the foil constantly because he's like scared of psychic attacks after that. The whole Rorschach inspiring this like white ring. What the fuck am I trying to say? Right
wing.
Right wing. Jesus Christ.
We're suffering.
That's going to go in the fucking best of episode. Me trying to say right wing. Him inspiring this militia and this secret he tried to get out being kept under wraps and stuff. And I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, no, it was really good.
But
I'd kind of forgotten about it going into this, if I'm honest with you, because I watched it when it came out a few years ago.
Yeah, it was great at the time, and I think it kind of, because it stopped there, like it was one and done kind of thing. Like, and fair enough, like it was good as it was.
It didn't need to. Yeah. Not everything needs to come back every year.
Exactly. And we'll finish on two little bits of news. One is Alan Moore is apparently publishing his last comic.
Wow, that's amazing. What's it going to be?
It is a comic/prose album called The Moon and Serpent Bumper Book of Magic.
Fuck, that's going to be amazing.
Yeah, it's the product of years-long creative partnership between Moore and his creative and magical mentor, Steve Moore. And then it says here, no relation. Good, fair enough. But yeah, it's a book about magic, and I don't know if it's maybe a coherent story or what, but it's coming out in October.
We're going to have to read it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, Moore needs some exposure from a local comic book podcast.
Yeah, totally.
Check out this up-and-coming rising comic book artist. His name's Alan Moore. Check him out on his new comic coming out.
As if Alan Moore's publishing one more comic. That's super cool.
I think it's one of those comic but not a comic. Like, I think he needs it to be like as far away as possible from the real comic.
But I'd fuck with that. That's really cool.
It's definitely, I guarantee he owns all the rights to it. Like, it's published by IDW, which is like one of the third like publishers. So they're definitely like, you have all the rights. Like, just let us publish it. You retain everything.
Please just let us make some money.
We just want a bit of money from it, and that's fine. So the other little thing I thought to end on was we mentioned last about the Watchmen HBO show. Yeah. So that was show ran by Damon Lindelof, who did Lost. Yeah. And I think it was The Leftovers or something like that. Yeah. But he's done like some interesting shows. Big fan of the Watchmen. He wrote to Alan Moore. Yeah. So someone asked him, like, have you made any contact? And he was just like, oh yeah, I tried, but nothing came of it, kind of thing. Like, really shoved under the carpet. Then Moore was interviewed, and they were like, oh, did Damon Lindelof reach out to you? He's like, yeah, he fucking did. He wrote a letter. Yeah. And apparently the letter started off in what Moore would describe as not a great way when he said he opened the letter with, "Dear Mr. Moore, I am one of the bastards currently destroying Watchmen."
That's so good. That's fantastic.
Moore did not like it.
No?
I think he was just in a negative space for the whole subject of it.
Yeah,
and he was just
but that's a really, like, I mean, you can see how he intended that to be, like, charming and disarming and self-deprecating, yeah.
Moore was just like, no, I'm not having any of that.
Not happy about it.
Your
not
magic
thrilled.
will not work on me.
I'm not thrilled.
Yeah.
No.
Apparently, Moore just responded generally with a... he said he got back with a very abrupt and probably hostile, so maybe a bit of self-reflection on Moore's part, but telling him that he thought the Warner Brothers were aware that they, nor any of their employees, should contact me again for any reason.
Wow.
Basically, like, leave me alone.
Fuck off.
Yeah, but I just thought that was like an interesting little tidbit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's
Take us out.
Watchmen done and dusted.
I've had to stand up because I'm so uncomfortable. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like to leave us a review, just make sure it's 5 stars and personally offensive to either myself or Mr. Comic Stan here. If you'd like to send us an email, comicliterate@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group.
There's a Facebook group, yes.
What's it called?
Comic Literate Podcast.
Comic Literate Podcast. So when this goes live, one of us will be there. And you
Probably,
can
yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and we'll like reply to stuff.
We'll
It'll
see
be great.
the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening.
And if you comment on YouTube, we've been responding to those as well. So.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.